deconstructing sports and skills with questions. As Tony Robbins would say, the quality of your questions determines the quality of your life. When I was interviewing athletes and coaches from 2008 to 2010, digging up non-obvious tactics for the 4-hour body, I sent different combinations of the following questions to dozens of experts. These can be modified for any skill or topic, not just sports. Just replace sport with what you want to learn, and track down your mentors. You can often find past gold and silver medalists willing to answer these via Skype for $50 to $100 per hour, which is an incredible steal and could save you years of wasted effort. Who is good at sport, despite being poorly built for it? Who's good at this? Who shouldn't be? Who are the most controversial or unorthodox athletes or trainers in sport? Why? What do you think of them? Who are the most impressive lesser-known teachers? What makes you different? Who trained you or influenced you? Have you trained others to do this? Have they replicated your results? What are the biggest mistakes and myths you see in sport training? What are the biggest wastes of time? What are your favorite instructional books or resources on the subject? If people had to teach themselves, what would you suggest they use? If you were to train me for 12 weeks for a fill in the blank competition and had $1 million on the line, what would the training look like? What if I trained for 8 weeks? In the case of basketball, I added 4 more to the above. The following questions were emailed to Rick Torbett, the founder of Better Basketball. What are the biggest mistakes novices make when shooting or practicing shooting? What are the biggest misuses of time? What mistakes are most common, even at the pro level? What are your key principles for better, more consistent shooting? What are they for foul shots, free throws, versus 3-pointers? What does the progression of exercises look like? I received his email responses and, 2 days later, hit 9 out of 10 free throws for the first time in my life. Then, on Christmas Eve, I went bowling and realized that many of the basketball principles, example determining eye dominance to move your vertical center line, apply to the lane, too. I scored 124, my first time over 100 and an Everest above my usual 50 to 70. Upon returning home, I immediately went outside and sank the first 2 3-pointers of my life. That's a hell of a lot of fun. It all starts with good questions. Peter Attia, MD, TW. At Peter Attia, eatingacademy.com, is a former ultra-endurance athlete, example. Swimming races of 25 miles. Compulsive self-experimenter, and one of the most fascinating human beings I know. He is one of my go-to doctors for anything performance or longevity related. Peter earned his MD from Stanford University and holds a BSc in Mechanical Engineering and Applied Mathematics from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. He did his residency in general surgery at the Johns Hopkins Hospital, and conducted research at the National Cancer Institute under Dr. Stephen Rosenberg, W.H. Peter focused on the role of regulatory T cells in cancer regression and other immune-based therapies for cancer. Peter's breakfast. It usually starts with nothing, and then I usually do a second course because I'm a little hungry and I'll have a little bit more nothing. I usually top it off with a bit of nothing. Peter rarely eats breakfast and has experimented with many forms of intermittent fasting, ranging from 1 meal a day, i.e., 23 hours of fasting per day, to more typical 16/8 and 18/6 patterns of eating, i.e., 16 or 18 hours of fasting and only eating in an 8 or 6 hour window. Going 16 hours without eating generally provides the right balance of autophagy, look it up, and anabolism. Muscle building. Random bits. Peter spent 3 straight years in nutritional ketosis, and maintained a high level of performance not only in ultra long distance cycling and swimming, but also in Strength, example flipping a 450-pound tire 6 times in 16 seconds. He still enters ketosis at least once per week as a result of fasting, one primary meal per day at 6 to 8 p.m., and he feels he is at his best on a ketogenic diet. His main reason for moving away from it was a craving for more fruits and vegetables. Peter is obsessed with many things, including watches, like the Omega Speedmaster Professional, caliber 321, which has been around since the 1950s, and professional grade car racing simulators. The simulator Peter owns uses iRacing software, but the hardware, seated cockpit, steering wheel, hydraulics, etc., is all custom built, so it doesn't have a name. His favorite car to drive is the Formula Renault 2000. Why Peter and I get along. Peter explains the joy of drinking his first experimental batch of synthetic exogenous ketones. The first one I tried was the beta-hydroxybutyrate ester, which a very good friend of mine sent me, Dominic D'Agostino, page 21, and I had been told these things taste horrible. I had talked to 2 people who had consumed them before, and these are stoic, military dudes. These weren't 6-year-old kids. They said, "Oh, man, that's the worst tasting stuff on earth." So I knew that, but I think that piece of information was fleeting in the excitement when the box came. I tore open the box, and there was also a note in there that explained a somewhat palatable cocktail that you could mix, how you could mix this with 10 other things. I just disregarded that and took out the 50 ml flask. I chugged it, and I remember it was like 6 o'clock in the morning, because my wife was still sleeping. First of all, you drink it, and it tasted like how I imagine jet fuel or diesel would taste. If you've ever smelled distillate, it's this horrible odor. And you can sort of imagine what it would taste like. This is what it tasted like, and so my first thought was, goddamn, what if I go blind? What if there's methanol in here? What did I just do? And then my next thought was just, oh my god, you're gagging. I mean, you're really gagging. If you puke this stuff up, you're gonna have to lick up your puke. It's just gonna be a disaster. And so I'm retching and gagging and trying not to wake up the family and trying not to spew my ketone esters all over the kitchen. It took around 20 minutes for me to get out and do my bike ride, which was the whole purpose of that experiment. Tools of the trade. Peter wears a Dexcom G5 continuous glucose monitor to track his glucose levels 24/7, which are displayed on his iPhone. His real goal, if he could wave a magic wand, is to keep his average glucose and glucose variability low. Outside of a lab, this approximates minimizing your insulin area under the curve, AUC. To accomplish this, Peter aims to keep his average glucose, for 24-hour period, at 84 to 88 mg/dl and his standard deviation below 15. The Dexcom displays all of this. Peter calibrates the Dexcom 2 to 3 times per day with the Onet Ouch Ultra 2 glucometer, which requires less blood and appears more accurate than the Precision Extra that I use for ketone measurement. Glut medius. Workout. Modern man is weakest and most unstable in the lateral plane. Having a very strong gluteus medius, tensor fasciae lati, and vastus medialis is essential for complete knee-hip alignment and longevity of performance. Peter once visited me in San Francisco and we went to the gym together. In between sets of deadlifts and various chocolatin macho moves, I glanced over and saw Peter in a centerfold pose doing what looked like a Jane Fonda workout. Once I finished laughing, he explained that he avoided knee surgery thanks to this exercise set taught to him by speed guru Ryan Flaherty and kinesiologist Brian Dorfman. Brian also helped him avoid shoulder surgery after a torn labrum. I tried his reverse thighmaster series and was dumbstruck by how weak my glute medius was. It was excruciating, and I felt and looked like an idiot. See Coach Summers' quote. If you want to be a stud on page 10. For each of the following 7 Moves, start with 10 to 15 reps each. Once you can do 20 reps for all 7 consecutively, consider adding weight to your ankles. You'll likely feel quite smug and self-satisfied for the first few, but remember, no rest until all 7 are done and no rest in between exercises. For all of these, keep your big toe below your heel, think pigeon-toed, to ensure you're targeting the right muscles. And perform this series 2 times per week. Hashtag 1 up/down. Lie down on your side and use your arm to support your head. Keeping your legs straight, lift your top leg and lower it, keeping your foot internally rotated as described above. Don't lift the foot very high. The max angle at your crotch should not exceed 30 degrees. Higher reduces the tension and defeats the purpose. For exercises hashtag 2, 4, maintain a roughly 12-inch distance between your ankles at the bottom. Maximize tension on the glute medius and only move your leg in a horizontal plane. Ensure the ankle doesn't dip when kicking behind you, for instance. In the first 1 or 2 workouts, aim to find the leg height that is hardest for you. It's usually 12 to 18 inches from the lower ankle. Remember to keep toe below heel. Hashtag 2 front kick/swing. Kick your top leg out to 45 degrees at the hip, as shown below. Think cabaret. Hashtag 3 back swing. Swing your leg back as far as possible without arching your back. Hashtag 4 full front and back swing. Swing your leg forward and then back. The previous 2 combined, with no pause at the midline. Hashtag 5 clockwise circles. Paint an 18-inch diameter circle with your heel. Remember, at the bottom of the circle, your ankles should be roughly 12 inches apart. If you let the ankles get within inches of each other, you're cheating. Hashtag 6 counterclockwise circles. Repeat in the other direction. Hashtag 7 bicycle motion. Pedal as if you were using a bicycle. Easy peasy, Japanesey. Switch sides. And repeat. Plank circles on Swiss ball. The goal of this separate exercise is to create scapular, shoulder blade movement and rotation. Scapular mobility is one of the keys to upper body function and longevity. The target muscles are the teres minor, infraspinatus, supraspinatus, subscapularis, and rhomboid. The setup is simple: get into a plank position with your elbows propped on a Swiss ball, forearms pointing straight ahead. Don't sag between the shoulder blades or at the lower back. Keep the hollow and protracted positions described on page 19. Start with the legs wide for stability, and you can narrow the feet as you get stronger. Keeping your body in this position, use your forearms to move the ball as described below. One set consists of 10 to 15 reps of each of the following with no rest in between. 1 clockwise circles. 2 counterclockwise circles. 3 forward and backward, i.e. sliding the elbows forward 6 to 12 inches and then back to your ribs. When you're doing this correctly, you should feel your entire shoulder blades scapulae moving. Peter will do 3 total sets per workout, 2 times per week. He will superset these with Wolverines. Google it on a cable machine. If done correctly, Wolverines target the rhomboids more than the deltoids. 5 blood tests Peter generally recommends. Of course, the answers depend on the individual and the risks each person faces: cardiovascular disease, cancer, etc., based on family history and genetics, but broadly speaking, looking through the lens of preventing death, these 5 tests are very important. 1 Apogenotype. This informs my thinking on a person's risk for Alzheimer's disease, AD. The gene is far from causal, meaning having it does not cause AD, but it increases risk anywhere from a bit to a lot, depending on which variant you have and how many copies you have. For what it's worth, the apophenotype, i.e. the actual amount of the lipoprotein in circulation in your body, is more predictive of AD than the gene and is obviously a better marker to track. However, a test is not yet commercially available. Stand by, though. I'm working on it. 2 LDL particle number via NMR technology that can count the Number of lipoproteins in the blood. This counts all of the LDL particles, which are the dominant particles that traffic cholesterol in the body, both to and from the heart and to and from the liver. We know that the higher the number of these particles, the greater your risk of cardiovascular disease. 3 LP, A, LP little a, via NMR. The LP, A, particle is perhaps the most atherogenic particle in the body, and while it's included in the total of LDL particle numbers, I want to know if somebody has an elevated LP, A, particle number, because that, in and of itself, independent of the total LDL particle number, is an enormous predictor of risk. It's something we have to act on, but we do so indirectly. In other words, diet and drugs don't seem to have any effect on that number. So we pull the lever harder on other things. Nearly 10% of people have inherited an elevated level of LP, A, and it is hands down the most common risk for hereditary atherosclerosis. The bad news is that most doctors don't screen for it. The good news is that knowing you have it can save your life, and a drug, in a class called APO, A, antisense drugs, to treat it directly will be around in approximately 3 or 4 years. 4 OGTT, oral glucose tolerance test. In this test, you drink a glucose concoction and then look at insulin and glucose response at 60 minutes and 120 minutes. The 1 hour mark is where you may see the early warning signs with elevated glucose levels, or anything over 40 to 50 on insulin, which can represent hyperinsulinemia, a harbinger of metabolic problems. In fact, the 1 hour insulin response may be the most important metabolic indicator of your propensity to hyperinsulinemia and insulin resistance, even in the presence of normal traditional markers such as HbA1c, 5-IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1. This is a pretty strong driver of cancer. Diet choices, example: ketogenic diet, caloric restriction, intermittent fasting, can help keep IGF-1 levels low, if such a strategy is warranted. Ketosis warning. Signs. Keto works well for many people, but it's not ideal for all. It's also not clear why some people do well for long periods of time, while others seem to derive max benefit from cycling. If certain markers get elevated, example C-reactive protein, uric acid, homocysteine, and LDL particle numbers, it's likely that the diet is not working properly for that person and requires tweaking or removal. Some patients who suffer from significant LDL particle number increases on keto can reverse the trend by limiting saturated fat to fewer than 25 g and replacing the required fat calories with monounsaturated fats, example macadamia nut oil, olive oil, limited avocado oil. Before you get comprehensive work done, decide what your threshold of action is. The likelihood of doing comprehensive testing and finding everything normal is low, so don't have testing done unless you're willing to accept the uncertainty that comes from needing to make decisions, or not, with incomplete and at times conflicting information. Before you check your APO gene, for example, you should know what you'll do if you have 1 or 2 copies of the 4 allele. TF, decide beforehand and not reactively when emotions run high what types of findings are worth acting upon or ignoring, and what your if/then actions will be. The dangers of blood test snapshots. It's important to get blood tests often enough to trend, and to repeat/confirm scary results before taking dramatic action. This has been echoed by other guests who have appeared on my podcast like Justin Major, MD, page 72, and Charles Poley Queen, page 74. In 2005, I swam from Catalina Island to LA, and I had my friend Mark Lewis, who's an anesthesiologist, draw my blood around 10 minutes before I got in the water on Catalina Island and then 10 minutes after I got out of the water in LA, 10.5 hours later. It was a real epiphany for me, because I had developed something called systemic inflammatory response syndrome, SIRS, which is something that we typically see in hospitalized patients who have horrible infections, or who have been in really bad trauma, gunshot, car accident, that sort of thing. My platelets went from a normal level to 6 times normal. My white blood cell count went from normal to I don't know 5 times normal. All of these huge changes occurred in my blood, so that you couldn't distinguish me from someone who had just been shot. I've always been hesitant to treat a patient for any snapshot, no matter how bad it looks. For example, I saw a guy recently whose morning cortisol level was something like 5 times the normal level. So, you might think, wow, this guy's got an adrenal tumor, right? But a little follow-up question and I realized that at 3 a.m. that morning, a few hours before this blood draw, the water heater blew up in his house. The normal level of morning cortisol assumes a guy sleeps through the night. He had to deflood his house. 4 bullets to dodge. If you're over 40 and don't smoke, there's about a 70 to 80% chance you'll die from one of 4 diseases: heart disease, cerebrovascular disease, cancer, or neurodegenerative disease. There are really 2 pieces to longevity. The first is delaying death as long as possible by delaying the onset of chronic disease, the big 4 above. We call that the defensive play. The second is enhancing life, the offensive play. On that defensive play, there are basically 4 diseases that are going to kill you. In other words, if you're 40 years old and you care about this, you're probably not going to die in a car accident or homicide, because you're out of that demographic. You're less likely to die of X, Y, and Z. It turns out that when you look at the mortality tables, there's an 80% chance you're going to die from cardiovascular disease, cerebrovascular disease, cancer, or neurodegenerative disease. Period. If you remember nothing else, remember this: if you're in your 40s or beyond and you care about living longer, which immediately puts you in a selection bias category, there's an 80% chance you're going to die of one of those 4 diseases. So any strategy toward increasing longevity has to be geared toward reducing the risk of those diseases as much as is humanly possible. For those who don't know, cerebrovascular disease would be stroke, and there's 2 ways you can have a stroke. One is through an occlusion, the other one is through bleeding, usually due to elevated blood pressure and things like that. Neurodegenerative disease, as its name suggests, is degeneration in the brain. The most common cause of that is Alzheimer's dementia, and Alzheimer's is one of the top 10 causes of death in the United States. Studies suggest to me that there's something about highly refined carbohydrates and sugars and potentially protein, though it might be for a different reason, that seems to raise insulin, which we know, by extension, raises insulin-like growth factor, IGF. And we know that IGF is driving not just aging but also certainly driving a lot of cancers, though not all of them. Supplements that Peter does not take. Peter consumes a fair selection of supplements based on his own blood work, so it's highly personalized. He does not take, however, a number of the common ones. Multivitamin, they're the worst of both worlds. They contain a bunch of what you don't really need and don't contain enough of what you do need. It poses an unnecessary risk with no upside. Vitamins A and E, he's not convinced he needs more than what he absorbs through whole foods. Vitamin K, if you eat leafy green vegetables, you're getting enough. K2 might be a different story for some people, depending on their diet. Vitamin C, most of us get sufficient amounts in our diet, and while megadoses might be interesting, especially for combating viral illnesses, it's not bioavailable enough in oral form. He is a proponent of magnesium supplementation. Our ability to buffer magnesium with healthy kidneys is very high. He takes 600 to 800 milligrams per day, alternating between mag sulfate and mag oxide. He also takes calcium carbonate 2 times per week. 2 of his favorite brands are Jarrow formulas and Now Foods. The logic of low-dose lithium. Based on conversations with Peter, I Now take low-dose lithium in the form of 5 milligrams of lithium orotate. The more I read epidemiological studies, the more I've come to think of lithium as an essential, or conditionally essential, element. 1 to 5 milligrams is enough to effectively ensure you are getting the high range of what is naturally occurring in groundwater in the U.S. As a primer, I suggest reading the New York Times piece, Should We All Take a Bit of Lithium? Asterisk from that article, although it seems strange that the microscopic amounts of lithium found in groundwater could have any substantial medical impact, the more scientists look for such effects, the more they seem to discover. Evidence is slowly accumulating that relatively tiny doses of lithium can have beneficial effects. They appear to decrease suicide rates significantly and may even promote brain health and improve mood. And from Peter, lithium is actually real. Why? Really safe at low doses. Basically anything below about 150 milligrams. If you have normal kidney function. It's one of those drugs that got such a bad rap with the large doses that were sometimes needed to treat recalcitrant monotherapy bipolar disorder, but those doses easily approaching 1200 mg have nothing in common with the logic above. More comedy long ago, when Peter went from 170 to 210 pounds, gaining mostly fat. Frankly, I just got aggravated beyond words. We joke about it now, but at the time I literally said to my wife, I'm going to go get a gastric bypass. And she said, you are the most ridiculous human being who's ever lived. We're going to have to talk about our marriage. If that's what you're considering at the weight of 210 pounds. I actually did go and see the top bariatrician in the city of San Diego, and it's kind of weird story. Because, even though I was obviously overweight, I was the thinnest person in the waiting room by a long shot. It put it in perspective. I thought to myself, Peter, you think you've got problems? I mean, these people each weigh 400 pounds. And when it was my turn to see the doctor, the nurse took me up to the scale and weighed me. We got on the scale, and I'm like 210. She says, this is fantastic. Are you here for a follow-up on dropping running and picking up weights? Nothing breaks my heart more than seeing that person who's struggling to lose weight, who thinks that they need to run 20 miles a week. They have no desire to do it, their knees hurt, they hate it, and they're not losing weight. And I'd like to say, well, I've got great news for you. You don't ever need to run another step a day in your life, because there's no value in that. There is value in exercise, though. And I think that the most important type of exercise, especially in terms of bang for your buck, is going to be really high intensity, heavy strength training. Strength training aids everything from glucose disposal and metabolic health to mitochondrial density and orthopedic stability. That last one might not mean much when you're a 30-something young buck, but when you're in your 70s, that's the difference between a broken hip and a walk in the park. Peter's Path to Meditation. 10% Happier by Dan Harris is the book that got Peter meditating regularly. After limited success with open monitoring or mindfulness meditation, he was introduced to transcendental meditation by a friend, Dan Loeb, billionaire and founder of Third Point LLC, a $17 billion asset management firm. Most gifted or recommended books. Surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman. By Richard Feynman. Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me, by Carol Tavris and Elliot Aronson. The latter is a book about cognitive dissonance that looks at common weaknesses and biases in human thinking. Peter wants to ensure he goes through life without being too sure of himself, and this book helps him to recalibrate. Peter's best $100 or less purchase. Peter has a monthly daddy/daughter date with his 8-year-old daughter. The below came up at the tail end of one outing. We were walking back to the hotel, and one of those rickshaw guys came up with a fully lit up bike. I would normally never even think about hopping a ride on one of those things, but I could just see this look in her eye. Wow, this bike has lights all over it. So we hopped on. This guy gave us a ride back, which Probably cost $20, so not even $100. And, believe me, it's $20 more than we should have spent to just walk back, but the look on her face was worth every dollar I have. I just got a little cheesy and cliche because old dads are like that, but that's the best $20 I've spent in a long time. Who do you think of when you hear the word successful? Peter mentioned several people, including his friend John Griffin, a hedge fund manager in New York, but I'd like to highlight his last answer, his brother. Peter's brother Paul, T.W. at Papa Alpha Blog, is a federal prosecutor, a great athlete, and father of 4 kids under the age of 5. He thinks an enormous amount about being a better federal prosecutor, and thinks just as much about how to be a better father. Peter elaborates. Success is, do your kids remember you for being the best dad? Not the dad who gave them everything, but will they be able to tell you anything one day? Will they able to call you out of the blue any day, no matter what? Are you the first person they want to ask for advice? And at the same time, can you hit it out of the park in whatever it is you decide to do, as a lawyer, as a doctor, as a stockbroker, as a whatever? Asterisk NFLs. Should we all take a bit of lithium? The New York Times, Sept. 13, 2014. Justin Major. Dr. Justin Major has helped me with dozens of my human guinea pig experiments, complete with blood testing and next generation tracking. He's brilliant and hilarious. Justin appeared on the podcast with Kelly Starrett. Page 122, a mutual friend and collaborator. When we ended the episode, I asked my usual where should people check you out? Justin's answer was, my honest parting comment is not to check me out, just fucking look in the mirror and check yourself out. My aspiration is to go underground and be a ghost. Love this guy. We're not an object, we're a process. We want to judge things as good or bad. So, there's this idea that inflammation is bad, thus the opposite is good. High cholesterol bad, low cholesterol good. But you have to understand what blood testing actually represents. First of all, it's a snapshot. It's a moment in time, and You're not an object, we're a process. Optimal depends on what you're optimizing for. For instance, there's some literature that suggests that if you have high LDL cholesterol, you can actually build more lean body mass at a faster rate. So, if you're in a strength building phase, it actually might be to your advantage to actually have that present. You need to know context. You also have to understand what the marker actually represents, not just have a judgment of whether it's good or bad. Hey, doc, what does cholesterol do? I like to ask that to physicians, especially if they're antagonizing me about my practice methods. I say, hey, what does cholesterol do? And it's interesting, because a lot of them will take a step back and they'll fumble, because they're so indoctrinated into the algorithm of all I really need to do is identify high cholesterol and treat it, versus understanding what purpose it serves in the human body. TF, there is a big difference between understanding something, what you want, in a physician, and simply knowing its name or labeling it. This is also one of the lessons that Nobel Prize winner Richard Feynman's father taught him. The story is contained in Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, the most gifted book of several people in this book, as well as in a wonderful short documentary called The Pleasure of Finding Things Out. The rule is, the basics are the basics. And you can't beat the basics. What you put in your mouth is a stressor, and what you say, what comes out of your mouth is also a stressor. Spirit animal. Siberian tiger. Charles Poliquin. Charles Poliquin, TW/FB. At Strength Sensei, strengthsensei.com, is one of the best known strength coaches in the world. He has trained elite athletes from nearly 20 different sports, including Olympic gold medalists, NFL All-Pros, NHL All-Stars, and Stanley Cup champions, and IFBB bodybuilding champions. His clients include America's first ever Olympic gold medalist in women's wrestling, Helen Morrow-Ulis, long jump gold medalist Dwight Phillips, NHL MVP Chris Pronger, and MLB batting champion Edgar Martinez, among many others. Poliquin has authored more than 600 articles on strength training, and his work has been translated into 24 different languages. He has written 8 books, including a short gem entitled Arm Size and Strength, The Ultimate Guide. Just because you exercise doesn't mean you deserve sugar water. The most important thing I've learned about nutrition is you need to deserve your carbs to deserve hundreds of kcal of carbs post-exercise. You need to be sub 10% body fat. And the quickest way to know if you have sub 10 body fat as a male is, can I see the lineal albo-vertical separation on your ABS? In other words, can I see all abros? One abro doesn't count. You've got to see them all. In other words, you have to have penis skin on your ABS. TF, one female reader responded on social media with, what if it's someone else's penis skin? Might be a workaround. I've got some athletes who do best on 70% carbs, 20% protein, 10% fat. But they deserve their carbohydrates. They've got a great pancreas, they're insulin sensitive, blah, blah, blah. They've got a lot of muscle mass. But some athletes, they're allowed 10 licks of a dried prune every 6 months. That's all they deserve, and that's all they'll get. And after 6 months, they're actually allowed to look at calendar pictures of cakes once a week. TF, for a low-carb post-workout option, see Goatway on page 84. Portable fuel. How do you identify a good strength coach? A good strength coach should get a female, no matter what her body fat is, to be able to do 12 chin UPS in 12 weeks. Charles's typical breakfast. Charles takes breakfast seriously. His typical combo includes some type of wild meat, typically pan-fried in Meyenberg goat butter, nuts, and sometimes berries or avocados. I really like macadamia nuts, but I vary that so I don't develop intolerances. On the road, one of the reasons I stay at the Marriott Worldwide is it's the only place that will serve steak and eggs. When traveling, of course, things can be harder. In Manchester, UK, for example, there was no way I could get steak and eggs for breakfast, so my assistant and I bought sardines. So we had sardines and Brazil nuts for breakfast the next day. I don't negotiate on that. For me, I either have meat, fish, or seafood and some nuts. TF, I bolded the above, as I have any friends who've been tested for food intolerances and called me with, I'm intolerant to navy beans, egg whites, too. Such results don't necessarily mean you have genetics that disallow these foods. There's a decent likelihood that you've simply been consuming too much of the same food and provoked a correctable autoimmune response, or B, the lab has made an error. I've seen labs return every patient, dozens, in a given week as intolerant to egg whites. Lab errors happen. Equipment malfunctions, and people make mistakes. The moral of the story? Vary your food sources and confirm any scary test results with a second test. For loose skin or stretch marks, there's an herb called gotu kola that I learned this from Dr. Moreau de Pascal, who was one of my early mentors. Will get rid of what we call unnecessary scar tissue or unnecessary connective tissue. The truth of the matter, though, is that you will see zero progress for the loose skin for 6 months. So, people say it's not worth it, but I tell people, just keep doing it for 6 months. And then it's almost like overnight. There are some compounding pharmacists who will make you a gotu kola bioabsorbable cream that works a lot faster. I would say if you can find a compounding pharmacist who will do that, and it's a biologically active form, you could get the same results in about 2 to 3 months. TF, I asked Charles about oral sources, and he suggested 1 dropperful of Gaia herb gotu kola leaf liquid extract per day, which also Improves tendon repair and cognitive function. 4 tests to check. Every 8 weeks. Charles recommends checking these biomarkers every 8 weeks. 1 morning, fasting, insulin. 2 morning, fasting, glucose. 1 thing I insist on is that they always do this test exactly 12 hours after the last bite. Why? Because I want pre and post measures that are valid. Your morning glucose could be all over the place because you fasted an extra 2 hours, and it's not valid. TF, this is a hugely important point. Standardize as many variables as possible. For instance, I will do blood tests on the same day of the week, and attempt to hydrate equally. Typically by drinking 1 to 2 liters of water and ensuring my pee is clear. Imagine that you do 1 blood test on Thursday, then your follow-up tests on a Monday after a weekend of booze, which can elevate liver enzymes. The values aren't comparable. It's also a good idea to avoid hard workouts for the 24 hours prior to your blood tests, if possible, so you don't get a false read on inflammatory markers. Control the variables. 3 Reactive insulin test. I think the reactive insulin test is the most underrated test in health. Dr. Peter Attia also includes this as OGTT, oral glucose tolerance test, in his top 5 tests. See page 65 for more details. 4 HbA1c, usually read as hemoglobin A1c. They say that, basically, you age at the rate you produce insulin. HbA1c will tell me what was the average insulin over the last 3 months. I've found over the years that, actually, the amount of magnesium, supplemental magnesium, you consume, is the fastest way to drop that value. So, magnesium is probably one of the best anti-aging minerals. More on magnesium. I think the best magnesium out there is magnesium threonate, if I were to pick one. But I prefer taking different chelates. TF, Dominic D'Agostino also takes magnesium, see page 30 for his thoughts. So I use glycinate, I use orotate. If you look at the physiology behind it, and there's a low T of good research that's really easy to find. Every form of magnesium tends to go to a specific tissue. So for example, magnesium glycinate has a preference for liver and muscle tissue. Magnesium orotate tends to work more in the vascular system. Magnesium threonate is more of a GABA inducer, therefore it improves sleep. Personally, I take 2 g of magnesium threonate at the last meal before going to bed, and I use various forms of chelates like magnesium glycerophosphate from GABA-Mag made by Trilogy Nutritional Supplements. Another go-to recipe for sleep: glutamine and physician prescribed probiotics. Vary the brands before bed. On good doctors, the length of time they spend with you on your first visit is probably your best indicator of their quality. To increase T, decrease C. As a rule, the best thing to increase testosterone is to lower cortisol, because the same raw material that makes testosterone and cortisol is called pregnenolone. Under conditions of stress, your body is wired to eventually go toward the cortisol pathway. TF, if you've ever laid down in bed exhausted, then felt wired and been unable to sleep, cortisol might be a factor. To mitigate this tired and wired phenomenon as well as reduce glucose levels before bed, I take phosphatidylserine and N-acetyl cysteine, NAC. For me, this also has a noticeable impact on lowering anxiety the following day. The best educator on HRT, hormone replacement therapy, is Thierry Hertoghe from Belgium. Back squat, front squat, or overhead squat, if you had to choose one for your athletes. The front squat. I have a lot of statistical data on that, because it is impossible to cheat on the front squat. I'm talking as to the grass front squat, meaning you leave a stain in the carpet in the bottom position. In my opinion, for athletic purposes, all squats should be done that way. They should perform it the way the Olympic lifters do it. So hands slightly wider than shoulder width, elbows up as high as you can, and actually the elbows in. That locks the bar into right in front of your throat. If you find the exercise comfortable, you're not doing it correctly. You should feel some restriction in the neck when you front squat properly. See Kelly Starrett's thoughts on squats on page 124. Step number 1 in a squat. Warm up. There's a lot of research that shows that mobility in the ankle is what decreases the probability of any lower extremity injuries, whether it's an ACL tear or hamstring pull or groin tear or whatever. So the first thing I would do in a warm-up prior to squatting is go on a calf machine and stretch the calves. And then go down and statically stretch for 8 seconds. I'd finish off with voluntary contraction, because it resets the pattern for strength. Research is clear: if you do static stretching and you don't finish with a contraction, you're more likely to get an injury. TH is, along with Paul Levesque's recommendation, prompted me to take Cossack squat seriously. See page 87. I pay more attention to my calves now than ever before, both for injury prevention and upper leg flexibility. See Christopher Sommer, page 9. Activating the hamstrings. I once took a kinetic chain enhancement seminar under Charles, in which he tore my arms apart with active release techniques, and doubled my shoulder internal rotation. ROM in minutes. See the 4-hour body. He also taught us the muscle tendon technique, how to activate the hamstrings, among other muscles, by using simple cross-fiber friction near the insertion points. For instance, to immediately increase your strength output in a set of hamstring curls, you could lie on the floor and have someone use a knife hand. Think judo chop edge to rapidly rub back and forth on each of the dotted lines in this illustration for 8 to 10 seconds each. For reasons that exceed the space we have, start at the gluteal fold, butt fold, lines for hamstring curls. But start with lines just below the knee. For deadlifts. Most gifted or recommended books. 59 seconds, Change Your Life in Under a Minute by Richard Wiseman, for stress reduction. The 4-Hour Work Week. The One Thing, the surprisingly simple truth behind extraordinary results by Gary Keller. So after reading the 4-Hour Work Week and the One Thing, when I'm at home, I work 2.5 to 4 hours max. I take the month of July off. I take the first 2 weeks of August off. I don't work from the month of December until about end of January, and a week a month I take off. Charles's best $100 or less purchase. It was a gift, so I'm not sure what the price was, but it can't be that high. It's called a bamboo bench made by German personal trainer Bernd Stoesslein. It has this half-moon shape. It attaches to any bench where your spine rests. So when you do pressing movements, you can drop the elbows much farther than with a regular bench. It allows for a freer scapular movement. It allows for a greater range of motion when you lift, and it allows pain-free upper body pressing. Who do you think of when you hear the word successful? Winston Churchill. This guy had balls. He stood up to Hitler. He rallied the United Kingdom. He refused to surrender. He's a Nobel Prize winner in literature. Very few people know that. TF, fun note: after Charles said this on my podcast, the owner of Winston Churchill's former home reached out to invite him to visit the slow-carb diet registered cheat sheet. Many people lose hope when trying to lose weight. Fortunately, it need not be complicated. Though I regularly fast and enter ketosis, the slow-carb diet, SCD, has been my default diet for more than a decade. It works almost beyond belief and affects much more than appearance. From one reader. I just wanted to sincerely thank him for taking the time to research and write The 4-Hour Body. My mom, in her late 60s, lost 45 pounds and got off her high blood pressure meds that she had been on for 20 plus years. She did all this in about 3 months. This means that I get to have her around for a long time. The basic rules are simple, all followed 6 days per week. Rule number 1, avoid white starchy carbohydrates, or those that can be white. This means all bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, and grains, yes, including quinoa. If you have to ask, don't eat it. Rule number 2, eat the same few meals over and over again, especially for breakfast and lunch. Good news. You already do this. You're just picking new default meals. If you want to keep it simple, split your plate into thirds, protein, veggies, and beans/legumes. Rule number 3, don't drink calories. Exception, 1 to 2 glasses of dry red wine per night is allowed, although this can cause some peri-/postmenopausal women to plateau. Rule number 4, don't eat fruit. Fructose rightward arrow. Glycerol phosphate rightward arrow more body fat, more or less. Avocado and tomatoes are allowed. Rule number 5, whenever possible, measure your progress in body fat percentage, not total pounds. The scale can deceive and derail you. For instance, it's common to gain muscle while simultaneously losing fat on the SCD. That's exactly what you want, but the scale number won't move, and you will get frustrated. In place of the scale, I use DEXA scans, a body metrics home ultrasound device, or calipers with a gym professional. I recommend a Jackson Pollock 7-point method. And then, rule number 6, take 1 day off per week and go nuts. I choose and recommend Saturday. This is cheat day, which a lot of readers also call Fatterday. For biochemical and psychological reasons, it's important not to hold back. Some readers keep a to-eat list during the week, which reminds them that they're only giving up vices for 6 days at a time. Comprehensive step-by-step details, including Q&As and troubleshooting, can be found in the 4-Hour Body, but the preceding outline is often enough to lose 20 pounds in a month and drop 2 clothing sizes. Dozens of readers have lost 100 to 200 pounds on the SCD. My 6-piece gym in a bag. I take these 6 items with me whenever I travel. In some cases, I buy several sets, which live in trunks stored at hotels in my most common locations, like LA and NYC. For the cost of checking luggage on a few flights, I can have my kit waiting in a few cities and avoid check-in lines. 1 voodoo floss, $20 to $30. This looks like a rubber ace bandage. It is used to wrap and compress stiff or injured body parts. It's small enough to fit in a jacket pocket, yet it often decreases pain and increases ROM more than fancy injections and $200/hour therapy. I use voodoo floss 1 to 2 times per day on my elbows and forearms during hard gymnastics training. Source, Kelly Starrett, page 122. 2 furniture sliders, $5 to $15. I've used these to freak out guests in hotels around the world. I'll put them under my heels for a move called AG walks with rear support. Page 17, which I do up and down hallways on the carpet. Source, Christopher Sommer. Page 9. 3 rumble roller, think foam roller meets monster truck tire. See details on page 3. Source, Amelia Boone. Page 2. 4 bed of needles. Technically, I bought a Naoya acupressure mat. There is a competitor, same, but different, called Bed of Nails, both available on Amazon. This type of rollout needle mat, which is covered with needles that look like cleat spikes, was recommended to me by Andriy Bondarenko, IG. At Andriy_Bondarenko. One of Cirque du Soleil's one-armed handstand prodigies. His former Ukrainian sport acrobatics coach had athletes use these for up to an hour a day. I find that 5 to 10 minutes in the morning can seemingly perform miracles, particularly for back pain. For one last year, this device was the only healing modality that got me back to training. 5 teras whey goat whey protein. If you are lactose sensitive, this can be a godsend, even for those who tolerate dairy well. Many, like me, find it easier to digest. I use a simple mason jar for mixing. If it's too goaty for you, I find it very Neutral consider. Adding a tablespoon of beetroot powder from Beet Elite or another brand. Source, Charles Poliquin. Page 74. 6 mini parallettes. Anyone who's seen gymnastics knows of the parallel bars. Anyone who's been to a CrossFit gym knows about the miniature versions called parallettes, typically made out of PVC pipes. What many haven't seen are the VitaVive MP12 ultralight mini parallettes that are small enough to fit in carry-on luggage. They are only high enough to clear your knuckles and are perfect for L-sits, planche, leans, and handstand training. This is much easier on the wrists than flat hand work. Famed neuroscientist Adam Gazzaley, Ph.D. Page 135, first introduced me to good at-home P-bars. Pavel Tsatsouline. Pavel Tsatsouline, TW/FB. At the Strong First. StrongFirst.com, is chairman of Strong First, Inc., a worldwide school of strength. He is a former physical training instructor for Spetsnaz, the Soviet Special Forces, and is currently a subject matter expert to the U.S. Marine Corps, the U.S. Secret Service, and the U.S. Navy SEALs. He is widely credited with introducing the now ubiquitous kettlebell to the United States and is the author of Kettlebell, Simple and Sinister. Sound check. Before interviews, I always check equipment with the same question. It's intended to get people talking for at least 10 seconds. This is what happened with Pavel. Tim, Pavel, if you don't mind, tell me about what you had for breakfast this morning as a sound check. Pavel, sound check. Breakfast. Coffee. I thought this was so funny that I stuck it at the beginning of the episode. Many fans listen to it over and over again for laughs. 2 warm-ups, halos, and Cossack squats. If you're looking for brief, high return warm-ups, here are 2 to consider. Halos. Grasp a weight with both hands and rotate it around your head to loosen up the shoulder girdle. I use a 25 to 45 pound kettlebell or plate for this and perform 5 slow reps in each direction. Start light. Cossack squat. When everything else failed, Cossack squats with the kettlebell, as shown below, roughly doubled my ankle mobility, which had a chain of positive effects. Keep your heels on the ground throughout, keep your knees in line with your toes, and keep your hips as low as possible when switching sides. I do 5 to 6 reps per side for 2 to 3 sets, often supersetting with Eric Cressy's Walking Spider-Man warm-up. Basic tenets for strength. Strength is the mother quality of all physical qualities. Strength is a skill, and as such, it must be practiced. Lift heavy, not hard. Anything more than 5 reps is bodybuilding. If you want to be strong, you want to keep your reps at 5 and under. If you are training for strength, you want to try and avoid the burn altogether. The burn is your enemy. Training is something that should be enjoyed. The last quote isn't a motivational throwaway line. It's literal. If you're training for maximal strength, you should feel better after your workout than you did when you walked in. There is a huge neural component. Effortless. Superhuman. Pavel introduced me to track coach Barry Ross. Ross had read a study performed by Peter Weyand at Harvard, concluding that the key to a sprinter's success is their relative strength. Specifically, how much force he or she puts into the ground per pound of body weight. Then Ross read Pavel's prescription for increasing strength with minimal muscle gain, deadlifts with heavy weights, low reps, low volume. And it emphasized negative. Barry put 2 and 2 together and developed a deadlift-based program to create world-class sprinters. One of his early prodigies was Allison Felix. His deadlift-based protocol utilizes partial range of motion and no negative/eccentric lowering. I followed this protocol over a period of 8 weeks and described this at length in the 4-hour body, so I'll only provide the simplified basics here. The basic technique, deadlift to your knees and then drop the bar. I used a sumo-style stance, but Conventional is fine. Format, 2 to 3 sets of 2 to 3 reps each. Each set followed by plyometrics. Example sprinting 10 to 20 meters, 6 to 8 box jumps, etc., then at least 5 minutes of rest. My best gains came from 10-minute rests, which aren't uncommon among power athletes. Frequency, I did this twice weekly. On Mondays and Fridays. The total time under tension during sets is less than 5 minutes per week. Results, I added more than 120 pounds to my max deadlift in 8 weeks and gained less than 10 pounds of additional mass. For relative strength, I've never experienced anything like it. Think. You're too old, or too X for deadlifts. Pavel's father took up this lift in his 70s. He pulled more than 400 pounds without a belt a few years later, setting several American records in the process. The breathing ladder have terrible endurance. Here's a strategy from Pavel's colleague, fitness instructor Rob Lawrence. For kettlebell swings, sprints, or any exercise that makes you feel gassed, decide beforehand that you're going to rest from one set to the next for a certain number of breaths, i.e., you get to D. 05, 10, 30. Or however many in between. This is going to discipline you to slow your breathing and stop overtaxing your nervous system. This control will help your endurance, even before biochemical adaptations. Amelia Boone, page 2, uses the breathing ladder with burpees as a warm-up. She will do ascending sets of burpees, from 1 rep to 10. In other words, she'll do 1 burpee, take 1 breath, 2 burpees, 2 breaths, and so on until she does 10 burpees and 10 breaths. 3 high-yield exercises. Pavel's simple and sinister kettlebell program. 1 arm swing, Turkish get-up, TGU, goblet squat. Do these 3 exercises in some form every day, and you are guaranteed to get a great return on your investment. The TGU is also excellent for diagnosing deficiencies. The hollow position isn't just for gymnastics. If you want to master pull ups, you need to develop your hollow position, see page 19. This, plus turning my toes inward, engaging obliques more fully, helped me to do strict military pull ups. Neck to the bar with pause, with 24 kilograms on the feet. To see the hollow position in action, watch any gymnast on rings. The tail is tucked in and the body looks like a dish. Pavel's tip, try to bring your tailbone and your navel closer to each other. When in doubt, train your grip and your core, strengthening your midsection and your grip will automatically increase your strength in any lift. With the ABS, the effect is partly due to greater intra-abdominal pressure and partly to improved stability. With the grip, you are taking advantage of the neurological phenomenon of irradiation. Tension radiates from the gripping muscles into other muscles. The most direct route to elite grip strength is Iron Mind's Captains of Crush grippers, which are available up to 365-pound resistance. Among effective midsection exercises are power breathing, hollow rocks, janda sit ups, hanging leg raises, and hardstyle planks. To do the last, hold a plank for 10 seconds under max contraction, not for several minutes. Hold it like you're about to be kicked and breathe behind the shield of your tensed midsection. For a challenge, consider putting your feet on the wall, a few inches from the floor. For reps and sets, do 3 to 5 sets of 3 to 5 reps in dynamic, moving, exercises. Or hold 10 seconds for static exercises. Take 3 to 5 minutes of rest in between sets for both. Or, as Pavel would say, better yet, grease the groove. That leads us to the next principle. Grease the groove. For strength, endurance, and strength. To increase your pull-up numbers, start doing half the reps you're capable of. Example sets of 4 if your personal best is 8. In repeated sets throughout the day. Simply accumulate reps with at least 15 minutes between sets, and adjust the daily volume to always feel fresh. Using GTG for several months. Pavel's father-in-law went from 10 to 20 strict pull ups at age 64, and he could not do that many when he was a young Marine. The minimum of 15 minutes rest is necessary for creatine phosphate hypercompensation. Whereas most strength endurance programs work by training one to tolerate more lactic acid, GTG instead trains one to produce less acid. It increases the quantity and quality of mitochondria in fast twitch muscle fibers and makes them more aerobic. If you are greasing the groove for a maximal strength movement, do not exceed 5 reps per set. In this case, the method will RKS through a different mechanism, for the nerds, synaptic facilitation and myelination. Let's say you're working up to a single perfect rep of a one-armed push-up. In your progression, you might do one-armed push UPS with feet on the floor and hands on the edge of a table or counter. If 6 reps is your max, you would do GTG sets of no more than 2 to 3 reps. My favorite odd stretch windmills, kettlebell windmills, or high windmills, are incredible for hip rehab and prehab. The standing position is similar to yoga's trikonasana, but you support 70 to 80% of your weight on one leg while you keep a kettlebell overhead. YouTube is your friend. A favorite quote from Enter the Dragon, Sparta, Rome. The knights of Europe, the samurai, worshipped strength because it is strength that makes all other values possible. Calm is contagious. This is another of Pavel's favorite quotes. Here is an elaboration from a speech by Rourke Denver, former Navy SEAL commander, a Master Chief, the senior enlisted rank in the Navy who was like a god to us, told us he was giving us an invaluable piece of advice that he'd learned from another Master Chief during the Vietnam War. He said, "This is the best thing you're ever going to learn in SEAL training." We were excited to learn what it was, and he told us that when you're a leader, people are going to mimic your behavior, at a minimum. It's a guarantee. So here's the key piece of advice. This is a LL he said, calm is contagious. Most gifted or recommended book. Most people exist between the on and off switch. They are unable to turn on and put out high power, and they are unable to turn off completely and enjoy true rest. To learn how to control your on and off switch, read the book Psych by Dr. Judd Biasiato. He is one of the most successful power lifters in history, having squatted over 600 pounds at a body weight of 132 drug-free, at the age of 44, after back surgery. Spirit animals, Laird equals killer whale, Gabby equals hawk, Brian equals raven. Laird Hamilton, Gabby Reese, and Brian Mackenzie Laird Hamilton, TW/FB. At Laird Life. LairdHamilton.com, is widely considered the greatest big wave surfer of all time. He is credited with the creation of toe-in surfing, using a jet ski to pull surfers into enormous waves, as well as the rebirth of stand-up paddle boarding. Hamilton has starred in multiple surfing films and was the centerpiece of Riding Giants, a documentary about big wave surfing. Gabrielle Reese, TW/IG. At Gabby Reese. GabrielleReese.com, has been named one of the 20 most influential women in sports by Women's Sports and Fitness and is best known for her success in volleyball. Reese led the Women's Beach Volleyball League in kills for 4 consecutive seasons. She parlayed that into a successful modeling career and then starred as a trainer on The Biggest Loser. Her crossover success led to her becoming the first female athlete to ever design a shoe for Nike. Rolling Stone has placed her on their Wonder Women list. Brian Mackenzie, TW/IG. At I Am Unscared, is the founder of CrossFit Endurance and the author of the New York Times best-selling book Unbreakable Runner. Brian has created controversy by suggesting a counterintuitively minimalist approach to distance running. He challenges not only high-mileage runs, but also high-carb diets, and he utilizes intense strength training to conquer everything from 5K runs to ultramarathons. He was prominently featured in the 4-Hour Body, where he described how to prepare for a marathon in 8 to 12 weeks. Brian has been featured in Runner's World, Men's Journal, ESPN, Outside, and The Economist. Backstory: Laird was one of my surfing teachers in my TV series, The Tim Ferriss Experiment, which was shot by ZPZ, the production company behind Anthony Bourdain's No Reservations, Parts Unknown, etc. My interview with Laird, Gabby, and Brian took place at Laird and Gabby's kitchen table in Malibu, immediately after a workout. I felt as high as a kite. Brian had brought me to experience how Laird trains in his customized pool, which is 13 feet deep at the deep end, and has stairs built into the floor. It also features underwater speakers for music, and a slack line about 2 feet above the surface. I'd been invited by Brian before, but always demurred out of fear of drowning. That morning, I bit the bullet, and nervously joined 6 to 10 other guys to repeat the following cycle for roughly 90 minutes, underwater training with dumbbells, ice bath for at least 3 minutes, then 220 degrees Fahrenheit sauna for 15 minutes. The entire gang does this workout twice a week, alternating with twice weekly dry land weight training sessions. They cheer each other on, and it's wonderful. Assholes don't last long. The warm-up for tough guys. Top professional athletes occasionally visit Laird to test drive his famed pool workout. If a big musclehead comes in with an attitude, he'll suggest they go warm up with Gabby. This is code. Gabby proceeds to casually annihilate them, leaving them bug-eyed, full of terror, and exhausted. Once they've been force-fed enough humble pie, IRD will ask, okay, are you ready to start the workout? As Brian has put it, the water goes, oh, mighty and aggressive. Perfect. I'll just drown you. What we drank pre-workout, Laird made everyone coffee, which he mixed with his own mocha-flavored superfood creamer, lairdsuperfood.com. It lights you up like a Christmas tree. Post-workout, fresh squeezed turmeric root, chaga mushroom, liquid pepper extract, raw honey, apple cider vinegar, and water. Dilute to taste. Laird sometimes combines the turmeric with K-Vita kombucha to reduce any residual bitterness. Gear in the pool. Cressy big eyes 2-lens diving mask. Goggles will come off. Psoas release not supposed to feel good. Laird routinely releases his psoas deep muscles that connect the lower back and the hip by getting on the ground and lying on top of either a kettlebell handle or the edge of a 25-pound Olympic weightlifting plate. The Man Book Club. Laird has what Gabby calls the Man Book Club. The regulars who come to his house to train, which includes super celebs, world record-setting free divers, and hugely successful CEOs, can suggest a nonfiction book of the month, and everyone will read it for discussion. Rick Rubin is a frequent contributor. Here are 2 that made the cut just prior to our interview: Natural Born Heroes by Christopher McDougall, Deep Survival by Lawrence Gonzalez, which Laird calls an incredible book about fear and dealing with fear. Practice go ing first. Gabby, I always say that I'll go first. That means if I'm checking out at the store, I'll say hello first. If I'm coming across somebody and make eye contact, I'll smile first. I wish people would experiment with that in their life a little bit. Be first, because not all times, but most times it comes in your favor. The response is pretty amazing. I was at the park the other day with the kids. Oh, my God. Hurricane Harbor Water Park. It's like hell. There were these 2 women a little bit older than me. We couldn't be more different, right? And I walked by them, and I just looked at them and smiled. The smile came to their face so instantly. They're ready, but you have to go first, because now we're being trained in this world to opt out. Nobody's going first anymore. TF, people are nicer than they look. But you have to go first. This made me think of a line from fictional character Raylan Givens in the TV series Justified: if you run into an asshole in the morning, you ran into an asshole. If you run into assholes all day, you're the asshole. I will often write go first in my morning journal as a daily prompt. Side note, Derek Sivers, page 184. Listen to this episode and Gabby's go first principle was one of his favorite takeaways. Early kiteboarding experiments. Before it was popular, we were the first ones to get the French non-restartable kites where you Release the guy and he just flies he craps and then it's over. Sometimes. You'd be like 2 miles out to sea with a giant quilt. Have you ever tried to swim with a quilt? It's very hard. Like a giant quilt and a lunch tray. Literally, the board looks like a lunch tray and you're 2 miles out, and you're looking at the shore and you're like, this is not a good day for me. Where can listeners find you? I ask this at the end of all of my interviews, so guests can mention social media, websites, etc. Laird answered. Without hesitation, the Pacific Ocean. The inspiration of Don Wildman. Brian, discussing Don Wildman and his incredible physical prowess at the age of 82. Well, Don Wildman did 80 days of snowboarding last year. I just went heli snowboarding with him 1 or 2 months ago in Alaska. I mean, heli boarding is a rigorous activity, a week straight of 15, 16 runs a day. The third, fourth day, you're wobbling, but not a word out of the gunslinger. I can take pretty much almost anybody on a bicycle. Unless you're like a professional bicyclist, and he will hammer you. Gabby, the other thing Don does that's very genius is he solicits people to be in his group because no man can really do it alone. So he always has these guys around him, most of them quite a bit younger. So the energy goes into the pot, and everybody rolls. TF. Rick Rubin also talks about Don on page 506. A lonely place is an unmotivated place. This line from Laird underscored everything I saw around him. He has a tightly bonded tribe around him, and scheduled group exercise appears to be the glue that keeps the group together. If you spend a lot of time thinking of the how and what of exercises, programming, etc., as I do, you might consider asking yourself, what if I had to choose all of my exercise based on who, first? What would I do if exercise were only allowed with other people? This is how I ended up diving into acro yoga. Page 52. Parenting advice. Laird and Gabby, married since 1997, have very close and affectionate relationships with their 3 kids. I've observed them over and over again. There is a lot of physical touch, and the pervasive feeling is one of warmth. It's lovely to be around. The following parenting tidbits are taken from different points in the conversation. Laird, loving your children can override a lot of wrongs. Even if you get some of the specifics wrong or make missteps. Gabby, we're inclusive, and we treat them like adults. We've always spoken to them like adults. As a parent, you have to learn to say sorry because you blew it. Sometimes you can go, hey, you know what? I am extra tired today and my fuse is short. I am being unfair to you, and I'm sorry. You have to learn that you're imperfect and open that door. I always ask my girls, do you feel loved enough? And they say, oh, come on, Mom. But I think you should ask. I tell my kids to learn how to say, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me. I've learned a lot from being around men. I respect a lot of traits. You can deliver a message without emotion. Usually, women, in order to finally stand up for themselves, they have to kind of be ramped up, and then it just comes out ballistic, instead of, no, that doesn't work for me. And I also teach them not to then second guess themselves after they've laid that line down. I think that's really important. And if you have gifts and talents, whatever they are, don't feel guilty and bad or weird about it. I always tell kids, if you're on the team, you're lucky, and if you're the best one, you're the luckiest. Gabby on learning assertion. As a woman, we're taught as young girls, hey, be nice. Nice girls act like this, so it takes a long time to get to a place of I'm going to do things, say things, and believe in things that people aren't going to like, and I'm going to be okay with that. Men do that much more easily, and it takes women a very long time. The only female athletes I've seen that do it very easily are generally the youngest girl in a family with all older brothers. See Caroline Paul, page 459. On the male/female dynamic in relationships. Laird, of 10,000 successful Couple studied, there's a NLY one thing that everybody had in common, no matter what the dynamic. What is it? The man respected the woman. The number one thing. Gabby, but can I say one thing? I know all those dynamics differ. The woman's the breadwinner, the man's the breadwinner, she's dominant, he's dominant, whatever, but ultimately, more times than not, if the woman can refrain from trying to change or mother her partner, she has a greater opportunity of putting herself in a position where the guy will respect her. A man needs support. I mean, I love you guys and you're all strong, but you're very fragile, and you need to be supported, and for us to help you fully realize your voice, whatever that is. Laird said to me the first couple of years we were together, unfortunately, his mom passed away the second year we were together. I had a mom, and she died. He made it very clear. That's off the table. Women by nature, we can't help it, we're nurturers, right? So sometimes that seeps over into, hey, honey, that joke was kind of inappropriate at the dinner table, and you're talking kind of loud, and all that. And because the man's trying to be loving, they pacify us and change all the ways we want them to, and then we don't want them. So it's a great thing to just say, hey, I'm going to pick a partner when I feel like our value systems are similar, and we may get there very differently, but how we wind up on some of the big items is the same. Oh. And weighing sacrifices based on the individual. What's easy for you isn't what's easy for someone else. Gabby, for a man to say, I'm going to really try to be with one woman, they're giving you most of what they've got. They're giving you like 80%. For a woman, maybe she's giving you 35% to be monogamous. Or, let's say I was very shy and I came out and was having a very nice conversation with you. Maybe I'm giving you 200% because of my nature. So I think it's also starting to understand who they are, that they're giving how they can give, and receiving it that way. On fixing physical weaknesses. Laird, all you flexible people should go bang some iron, and all you big weightlifters should go do some yoga. We always gravitate toward our strengths because we want to be in our glory. Advice to beat up former athletes? Brian, more humility. That's why I thought it was so important that you come up here. It wasn't, oh, I need to dose him with humility. No, it was, hey, come see what it's like to apply something that you can do for the rest of your life. TF, by more humility, I took Brian to mean considering scary options with an open beginner's mind. I'm so thrilled. I took the risk of embarrassment to train with Laird and the gang. First, it showed me an intense but sustainable method of training, which includes ingredients I often neglect: social cohesion, training outdoors, etc. Second, it made me believe I am capable of much more than I thought. Advice for your 30-year-old self? Gabby, not to take anything personally, but also don't hold yourself back. I think this is a trait of a female more than of a male. We have a tendency sometimes to sit on our talents and potential because we don't want to offend anyone or be singled out. I heard a great story. I had a coach once who was an assistant coach to the men's USA volleyball team. One game they needed 1 point, and the coach looked straight at Clark Kirley and said, I need you to put this ball away and for you to win this game, and it was like, boom. Okay. And then Clark did it. Then the same coach was coaching women at a very high level, and he did the same thing to the athlete who was the one. It didn't work because it's a singling out that we women have a hard time with, instead of understanding that you can be singled out for the greater good. Laird, stop drinking now. Stop drinking right now and patent all your ideas and exercise compassion every day. James Fadiman. James Fadiman, PhD. psychedelicresearch@gmail.com. JamesFadiman.com, has been involved with psychedelic research since the 1960s. He did his undergraduate work at Harvard and his graduate work at Stanford, where he collaborated with the Harvard Group, the West Coast Research Group in Menlo Park, and Ken Kesey. He is the author of the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide and is often referred to as America's wisest and most respected authority on psychedelics and their use. Preface. Some of my loved ones would insist that the most important work I've done in the last 4 years has involved studying and judiciously using psychedelics. As just one example, 90% of the latent anger and resentment I'd had for more than 25 years was eradicated after 48 hours of medicine work 2 years ago, for reasons still not entirely clear, and my hair trigger habits of decades have not returned. Note, I do think the pharmacological risks of these compounds are exaggerated, but their legal side effects are not. In the US, most classic psychedelics, LSD, psilocybin in magic mushrooms, peyote, etc., are in the same legal class as heroin, Schedule I, and carry similar penalties. And although the LD50 lethal dose for 50% of the population, a common measure of toxicity, is unbelievably high or practically non-existent for most psychedelics, things can go horribly wrong in uncontrolled environments. Example: walking in front of oncoming traffic, and they can greatly exacerbate pre-existing mental health conditions. I watched one family friend go from normal to schizophrenic. His family had a history of it, after frequent LSD use. Of course, I wouldn't want you to go to jail or hurt yourself, so only use psychedelic as in legal contexts, with professional medical supervision. For a legal alternative, see Dan Engel's discussion of flotation tanks on page 110. What are psychedelics? The word psychedelic, Greek for mind-revealing, is generally used to refer to compounds that can reliably separate you from your ego and occasion mystical or transcendental experiences. The best formal definition of psychedelics I've found is that of N. Crowley in the British Journal of Psychiatry, a role for psychedelics in psychiatry. Sad face. The difference between psychedelics, entheogens, and other psychotropic drugs is that entheogens work as nonspecific amplifiers of the psyche, inducing an altered or non-ordinary state of consciousness. Groff, 2000. The content and nature of the experiences are not thought to be artificial products of their pharmacological interaction with the brain, toxic psychoses, but authentic expressions of the psyche revealing its functioning on levels not ordinarily available for observation and study. Many psychedelics, psilocybin, mescaline, etc., have been used ceremonially for hundreds or thousands of years by indigenous cultures. More recently, universities around the world have begun testing these molecules for addressing treatment-resistant depression, removing end-of-life anxiety in terminal cancer patients, ending nicotine addiction, and more. Roland Griffiths, Ph.D., a professor at Johns Hopkins Medical School, shares a typical upshot from one early study. Most of the 36 volunteers looked back on their experience up to 14 months later and rated it as the most, or one of the 5 most, personally meaningful and spiritually significant of their lives. For volunteers with children, the experience was often put above, or on par with, the birth of their first child. From a psychopharmacological perspective, many psychedelics resemble a naturally occurring molecule called DMT and act as 5-HT2A serotonin, or NDMA receptor agonists. But there are exceptions, and the mechanisms of action remain poorly understood. This is part of the reason that I'm helping fund scientific studies at places like Johns Hopkins and UCSF. Although marijuana, ketamine, and MDMA have compelling medical applications, I don't consider them psychedelics. Jim explains our shared distinction, using MDMA as an example. It's not exactly a psychedelic because you don't leave your identity behind, but it is the single best way to overcome intractable post-traumatic stress disorder. The noun entheogen, meaning generating the divine within, has become a popular alternative to the term psychedelic. My good friend. I have a good friend, let's call him Slim Ferriss, who's devised a schedule for himself that combines practical microdosing and pre-planned 1 to 2 day treks into deeper territory. For him, this blend provides a structured approach for increasing everyday well-being, developing empathy, and intensively exploring the other. Here is what it looks like. Microdosing of ibogaine hydrochloride twice weekly, on Mondays and Fridays. The dosage is 4 milligrams, or roughly 1/200 or less of the full ceremonial dosage at Slim's body weight of 80 kilograms. He dislikes LSD and finds psilocybin in mushrooms hard to dose accurately. Woe unto he who microdoses and gets hit like a freight train while checking in luggage at an airport. Poor Slim. The encapsulated ibogaine was gifted to him to solve this problem. Moderate dosing of psilocybin, 2.2 to 3.5 g, as ground mushrooms in chocolate, once every 6 to 8 weeks. His highly individual experience falls somewhere in the 150 to 200 mg. Description of LSD by Jim later in this piece. Slim is supervised by an experienced sitter. Higher dose ayahuasca once every 3 to 6 months for 2 consecutive nights. The effects could be compared, though very different experiences, to 500 plus mg of LSD. Slim is supervised by 1 to 2 experienced sitters in a close-knit group of 4 to 6 people. Maximum. Not. In the 4 weeks prior to these sessions, he does not consume any ibogaine or psilocybin. Note that not all psychedelics are for all people. Jim, for instance, doesn't use ayahuasca. On our walk in a canyon in San Francisco, he said to me, "I feel like the plant Aya has its own agenda." I'd have to agree with him, but that could fill an entirely separate book. Be sure to read Dan Engel and Martin Polanco's profiles on page 109, which explore ayahuasca and ibogaine, specifically origins and dangerous books. There are 2 great beings who invented psychedelics, God and Sasha Shulgin. I think Sasha may have invented more, but there are literally hundreds that he played with and looked at. Sasha wrote 2 books about his creations and experiments. Pill, A Chemical Love Story. Pill equals phenethylamines I have known and loved. Til, the continuation, Til equals tryptamines I have known and loved. The 2 volumes are filled with instructions for how to synthesize these various molecules. He said he put these books out so that the government couldn't stop people from experimenting. Personally, I prefer the whole plant sources that have been used for millennia. What does it feel like? If you are depressed, you are living in the past. If you are anxious, you are living in the future. If you are at peace, you are living in the present. Lao Tzu. Most of us have had the experience of sitting at a computer with 20 open tabs. How did this age open? Didn't I just clean this up last week? Then you get a warning of startup disk almost full. So you delete a few videos as damage control, but why is everything still running so damn slowly? Oh. Dropbox is syncing. Slack has 17 new notifications. Microsoft needs another critical update. There are 20 applications running on top of 20 windows, fracturing your ability to focus. 60 minutes later, you've done a lot of stuff, tapped the keyboard a lot, and burned a ton of energy, but you couldn't say what you've achieved. Feeling rushed and frustrated, overwhelm begins to set in. Time to go get another coffee. Life can feel this way. Finances, taxes, relationships, wedding invitations, car check, UPS, Facebook, groceries, startup disk almost full. For me, moderate to high dose of psilocybin with supervision serves as a hard reboot. It closes all the windows, force quits all the applications, flushes the cache, installs upgrades, and when I'm back to normal restores my 30,000-foot view. It removes the noise, giving me a crystal clear view of the most critical priorities and decisions. The first time I used psilocybin at sufficiently high doses, the anxiolytic anxiety decreasing effect lasted 3 to 6 months. This catalyzes not only insight but action. Sounds great, Right? It can be, but that result is far from guaranteed. Psychedelics usually give you what you need, not what you want. To get to pleasure, you oft and need to claw through pain first. Doses and effects. From Niagara Falls to a casual stroll. Note, the below dosages are specified by Jim. They are listed from high to low and are specific to LSD, but the effects correlate to many psychedelics. Here's framing context from Jim. These substances, unlike almost every other kind of medication, have very different effects at different dose levels. It is almost as if they were different substances. Heroic dose. Ethnobotanist Terence McKenna coined the term heroic dose, which is often equated to 5 or more grams of mushrooms or more than 400 mg of LSD. James doesn't recommend this brute force dosing, which McKenna described as sufficient to flatten the most resistant ego. Jim feels that you don't remember anything, nor do you bring anything back, at this dose. It's kind of like, you want to go swimming? How about going over Niagara Falls? 400 mg is where you have a transcendental or mystical experience. At this dose or higher, it is critical to have qualified supervision in the form of a guide. Transcendental here roughly means the feeling or the awareness that you are connected not only to other people but to other things and to living systems. More on this later. 200 mg can be used for psychotherapy, self-exploration, deep inner work, and healing. 100 mg is useful for creative problem solving with non-personal matters, example physics, biomechanics, or architecture. A number of Nobel Prize laureates in chemistry, biology, and elsewhere attribute breakthroughs to LSD. Jim once worked on a study involving large companies and research institutes trying to solve incredibly difficult problems like new circuit board designs. Volunteers were given psychedelics, and 44 out of the 48 problems were solved, meaning resulted in a patent, product, or publication. Jim attributes this to enhanced focus and pattern recognition. Low enough doses, i.e., 100 mg of LSD or 200 milligrams of mescaline, can immensely increase the capacity to solve problems. We said, you may come to this study, and we'll give you the most creative day of your life. But you have to have a problem which obsesses you that you have been working on for a couple of months and that you failed to solve. We wanted them to have an emotional money in the game. We gave them psychedelics and had them relax with music and eye shades for a couple of hours. And then, right at the peak, we bring them out and say, you may work on your problem. What was wonderful is nobody did any personal therapeutic work because that's not what they came for. And out of the 48 problems that people came in with, 44 had solutions. 50 mg is considered a concert dose or museum dose. Self-explanatory. 10 to 15 mg is a microdose. Described by Jim, everything is just a little better. You know, at the end of a day when you say, wow, that was a really good day. That's what most people report on microdosing. They're a little bit nicer. He elaborates, what I'm finding is that microdoses of LSD or mushrooms may be very helpful for depression, because they make you feel better enough that you do something about what's wrong with your life. We've made depression an illness. It may be the body's way of saying, you better deal with something, because it's making you really sad. A microdose of psychedelics is actually a low enough dose that it could be called subperceptual, which means you don't necessarily see any differences in the outside world. As one person said to me, the rocks don't glitter even a little, and the flowers don't turn and watch you. Albert Hofmann, the inventor of LSD, considered microdosing the most neglected area of research. Hoffman microdosed LSD often for the last few decades of his life. He remained sharp until he died at 101. He would take it when he was walking among trees. In Jim's opinion, microdosing psychedelics does a far better job than a whole class of drugs we now call cognitive enhancers, most of which are simply derivatives of speed. Oddly, There are consistent reports of microdosing having a lag effect. I've experienced this myself, and it's the reason for Slim Barris's Monday/Friday spacing of ibogaine. Many microdosers, including one executive who runs a large corporation with manufacturing in 5 countries, have said, the second day is better. Which users have the most durable positive effects? In short, it's those who experience a transcendental experience. Remember that squirrel term. Jim describes this as the feeling or the awareness that you are connected not only to other people, but to other things and living systems and to the air you breathe. We tend to think we're kind of encapsulated. Obviously, the air I am breathing comes from all over the world, and some of it's a billion years old. Every 8 years, I get almost all new cells from something. Everything I eat is connected to me. Everyone I meet is connected to me. Right now you and I are sitting outside, and our feet are touching the ground. We're connected to the ground. Now, that's all easy to say, intellectually and even poetically. But when you actually experience that, you're part of this larger system. One of the things that you become aware of is that your ego, your personal identity, is not that big a part of you. What I learned was, and this is from my own personal experience in 1961 gym fad, Iman is a subset of me, and the me is very, very large and a lot smarter and knows a lot more than Jim Fadiman. He saw a similar shift in subjects during his dissertation research, and they very often laughed during these realizations in a very deep way, and it isn't the giggles of marijuana. It's the laughter of how could I have forgotten who I really am. And then, much later in the day, when they're reintegrating and finding that they are surprisingly still in the same body they came in with. One person said very beautifully, I was back in the prison of all of the things that hold me back, but I could see that the door was locked from the inside. Don't rush the experience, don't cheapen the experience. There's something called salvia divinorum, and the wonderful thing about salvia is it has nothing to do chemically with anything else I've just talked about. It's been used in Mexico historically for who knows how many thousands of years for divination, for finding out things. And, again, we seem to be able as Americans to take almost anything that is indigenous and screw it up in some way. So people smoke salvia and have a short, intense, sometimes meaningful experience. That isn't how it's traditionally used. It's chewed, which means it takes about an hour, and it comes on slowly. It's a totally different experience. TF, please note that salvia divinorum is illegal in either case. The point is that mode of administration matters. On sitters. A sitter is someone who supervises a psychedelic experience, ensuring safety and comfort. Jim's book, The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, offers comprehensive guidelines for this role. But in simple terms, a good sitter is someone you trust. A great sitter is someone who loves you and you trust. A superlative sitter is someone who doesn't have any agenda of their own. They don't want you to see a certain thing. They don't want you to be a certain way. They don't want you to discover a certain thing. With or without psychedelics, sounds like good criteria for close friends, too. On the importance of pre and post work. There's a saying in the psychedelic world, if you get the answer, you should hang up the phone. In other words, when you get the message you need, you shouldn't keep asking, i.e., having more experiences, at least until you've done some homework, assignments, or used the clarity gained to make meaningful changes. It's easy to use the medicine as a crutch and avoid doing your own work, as the compounds themselves help in the short term as antidepressants. Compulsive users generally neglect critical preparation and post-session integration work. MDMA is a wonderful tool for releasing people from PTSD, for instance, but the success can usually be attributed, in large part, to preparing for the experience with a psychotherapist. Having 2 guides, male and female, and spending a lot of time talking and integrating after the experience. There's no point in going to a motivational seminar if you're not going to take any Next steps. Spirit. Animal. Martin equals. Gummy. Bear. Martin. Polanco and Dan Engel. Martin Polanco, MD, TW. At Martin_Polanco 7. CR. OSSRoadsEvogain.com, is. The founder and program director of Crossroads Treatment Center. Based in Rosarito, Mexico. Crossroads specializes in helping patients conquer powerful addictions, such as heroin or cocaine, using the African hallucinogen ibogaine and 5-MeO-DMT, also referred to as the God molecule. Dan Engel, MD, TW. At Dresdenengel, drdnengel.com, is board certified in psychiatry and neurology. He combines functional medicine with integrative psychiatry to enhance regenerative health and peak performance. His prior experience includes traumatic brain injury research and working in the Peruvian jungle with plant medicines such as ayahuasca. In this profile, we discuss several psychedelics, including 1. Legal option, flotation therapy. Ibogaine and 5-MeO-DMT are detailed at some length, as they're both used at Martin's clinic. Ibogaine is the only compound I've seen that can eliminate 90% plus of the physical withdrawal symptoms of heroin addiction in one fell swoop. It's also one of the few psychedelics that can kill you, so I cover it at the end. What would you put on a billboard? Dan, be curious. Flotation tank as psychedelic. Dan, I'm just about as excited about flotation therapy as I am about psychedelics, because not everybody is going to do a psychedelic. Maybe it's not in everybody's best interests to do it, but everybody can float. When prepped well and done consistently over time, it can still be an extraordinary psychedelic arena. By this, I essentially mean coming back to a deeper connection with oneself. TF, flotation therapy, in simple terms, is floating in a roughly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit hot tub with a lid over it. It's completely dark, there is no sound, and there are 800 to 1,200 pounds of Epsom salt in the water to make you float on the surface, feeling weightless. It can be thought of as a sensory deprivation tank. If you can't handle at least 60 minutes in a flotation tank, you aren't ready to have an unstoppable psychedelic experience. As one guide for the latter put it to me, I can start the music, but I can't make it stop. In contrast, if you get twitchy during a float, you can step out. Use this environment as training. Lab verified lucid dreaming, Google Lucid Dreaming 101 Ferriss, is also useful for developing navigational skills for psychedelics, but lying in salt water requires less work. When possible, I now try to float twice per week, Monday and Friday. After 2 weeks, I feel like I normally would after a month of daily meditating. Even if I'm not meditating. Dan, floating in an isolation tank is the first time that we've been without sensory experience, sensory environmental stimuli, since we were conceived. There is no sound, no sight, no temperature gradient, and no gravity. So all of the brain searching and gating information from the environment is relaxed. Everything that was in the background, kind of behind the routine, can now be exposed. When done consistently over time, it's essentially like meditation on steroids. It starts to recalibrate the entire neuroendocrine system. People who are running in stress mode or sympathetic overdrive start to relax that over time. And you get this bleed over effect into everyday life. It's not just what happens in the tank. It continues outside of the tank. You see heart rate normalize, hypertension normalize, cortisol normalize. Pain starts to resolve. Metabolic issues start to resolve. Anxiety, insomnia, and mental chattering can be significantly improved. In 2 to 3 times per week for a total of anywhere between 3 and 7 sessions. For pain, it's normally 7 to 10 sessions. I recommend doing a 2-hour float if people are able. TF, according to Dan, most people get exponentially more benefit from a single 2-hour session than 2 separate 1-hour sessions. Nonetheless, 2-hour floats still make me fidgety, so I routinely do 1-hour sessions. Keeping it simple, Dan suggests you Start with 2 to 3 floats inside of 1 month. I've never had anybody come back and say, yeah, that didn't work. Ayahuasca or LA. Purga, the purge. This Amazonian brew is one of Dan's specialties. The experience generally lasts 4 to 7 hours. If you think of psilocybin, LSD, or peyote as different types of alcohol, say vodka, red wine, and scotch, ayahuasca is more like a cocktail. This makes it hard to standardize. Just as in an old-fashioned, there are core ingredients. In this case, they are the DMT-containing chacruna leaf and the ayahuasca vine itself, which contains an MAO inhibitor that makes the chacruna DMT orally bioavailable. Different ayahuasqueros, ayahuasca shamans, will then add their own ingredients to the brew, sometimes including powerful or even dangerous plants like to, similar to the North American datura plant, containing scopolamine. No session is quite the same as any other. For me, ayahuasca has been unique among psychedelics for many reasons. In my second ever session, for example, I had the scariest experience of my life. It involved uncontrolled grand mal seizures on a floor for 2 hours. Among other things, I awoke to rug burns all over my face and hands, and I was untethered from reality for the next 48 hours. Thankfully I had hired someone to watch me 24/7 during and after the weekend. He was able to babysit and prevent insane ideas from becoming life-destroying actions. His repeated advice was, if it's really true today, it will still be true tomorrow. I haven't had this extreme a reaction since, but it happened. And such a response, while not typical, is also not that uncommon. You might wonder, why would I ever use ayahuasca again after that? Here's why. Over subsequent weeks, I realized that some of most critical relationships in my life had been completely repaired. I saw things differently, reacted differently, and interacted differently, as if I had been reprogrammed. Those changes all persist to this day. So, there's a huge potential upside but equally huge potential downside if taken lightly or done with the wrong people. I mention this cautionary tale because ayahuasca has become terribly trendy. It's the thing to talk about at cocktail parties, and I shudder every time I hear something along the lines of, I'm going to my friend's place in Manhattan for an Aya ceremony this Sunday night. She mail ordered some brew from Hawaii. And we're doing tea together. It's going to be amazing. There are now hundreds of new age folks out there, yoga instructors, didgeridoo players, whatever, who decide to play shaman based on reading a few books, watching a few YouTube videos, or having experienced a few ceremonies themselves. I consider this all psychological Russian roulette. My suggestion is that you treat ayahuasca as if you are planning to have a brain tumor removed by a brain surgeon. Spiritually, this is effectively what you're attempting. In such a case, you would spend months, if possible, researching all of the best doctors. You would treat it like a life and death decision because of what could go wrong if it were done incorrectly. From my direct experiences, I feel like ayahuasca warrants this level of caution, respect, preparation, and due diligence. Martin elaborates. That's why it's so critical to have preparation before the experience and then a period of integration afterward. Because you are in this opened up and receptive state and more suggestible. Whatever habits you incorporate in the weeks afterward can stick, and these can be good or bad. Dan, ayahuasca is traditionally done in a group ceremony setting, but it's a very solo, inward journey. Typically, it's done in the dark, in the jungle. You go through deep psychological healing, oftentimes pre-verbal healing around traumatic issues that occurred between birth and age 4. From a developmental psychological perspective, this is when most of the long-term personality traits are formed. You gain a witness perspective, the fear centers relax, the trauma is brought back up onto the screen of the mind. You oftentimes get this replay of very early things and can have a corrective experience. Through that, I can personally see the network of interrelated factors and potentials. My mind starts to understand how things have affected me, how things are affecting the world, and potentially The next step for me to take in my journey. TF, ayahuasca is sometimes called La Purga, the purge, because participants often experience uncontrolled vomiting or defecating. I've never experienced either, but all of my companions have at least vomited. I was concerned at one point that I wasn't doing it right or getting maximum benefit, and the shaman assured me that purging is not a good measure of how valuable the experience is. He had only purged twice in 10 years. Dan, it is very successful in helping people transition from chronic depression into what would be called euthymia, or normal mood. Many people don't even know what having a normal mood feels like, but optimism, faith, courage, strength, and personal empowerment are some of its qualities. TF, ayahuasca is classically described as very visionary, or rich in visual hallucinations, though some people have more mental or kinesthetic experiences. I tend to go through it in 3 stages. Visual, often overwhelming; mental, intellectually able to engage and see solutions or answers; then physical. More often than not, I will cycle through these 3 phases during each long icaro, or song, that is sung. For the best approximation, search for Jan Kaunen's ayahuasca visions on YouTube. 5-MeO-DMT. Martin uses 5-MeO-DMT with his patients after treating them with ibogaine and iboga. DMT is sometimes referred to as the spirit molecule, and its variant 5-MeO-DMT is called the God molecule. 5-MeO-DMT is found in the venom of a desert toad and is vaporized and inhaled, not taken orally. It's toxic if ingested. It is a short 5 to 15 minute experience. To put it in context, here is what the schedule might look like for a heroin addict at Martin's clinic. Pre-care for several weeks. Improving diet and exercise. Weaning off psychiatric meds, etc. Monday of treatment week. Comprehensive medical tests in Mexico. Heroin addicts are switched to morphine. Wednesday night, 4 of saline and electrolytes, then encapsulated ibogaine, dosed at 10 to 12 milligrams per kg of body weight. Patients are hooked up to continuous cardiac monitoring throughout. The forecatheter is kept in with a heplock, in case atropine needs to be administered for an abnormally slow heartbeat. Bradycardia. Thursday, patients typically haven't slept, and this is nicknamed the gray day. Addicts sometimes have residual withdrawal symptoms and feel as though they're not benefiting. Friday, patients begin to feel better and regain their feet. If any residual withdrawal symptoms persist, iboga, 300 milligrams capsule, then more if needed, which contains ibogaine and other alkaloids, is used. Saturday, 5-MeO-DMT. Administered. Post-care, 2 to 3 weeks in San Diego, recommended but optional. Martin, DMT is found in ayahuasca, whereas the 5-MeO-DMT is naturally found in certain plants and in the venom of the Sonoran desert toad, also known as the Colorado River toad, which lives in northern Mexico and southern Arizona. Its venom is thought to have been used ceremonially for hundreds, if not thousands, of years by Mexican indigenous cultures to induce states of mystical consciousness. What we like about this medicine, and what is particularly useful for drug addiction, is that it reliably occasions mystical experiences in our patients. About 75% report experiencing an intense and profound sense of awe, divine presence, peace, joy, and bliss that transcends time and space. People often describe their 5-MeO experience as one of the peak transformational and spiritual moments of their entire lives. In the body, 5-MeO-DMT acts on the serotonin 1A and 2A receptor sites, which have been linked to mystical experiences in other psychedelics such as LSD and psilocybin. However, compared to classic psychedelics, 5-MeO appears to induce these experiences more consistently, and with greater potency and shorter duration. Interestingly, 5-MeO is also shown to have anti-inflammatory, immune-regulating, and pain-reducing effects because of its action at the sigma-1 receptor. Our patients often report a reduction or elimination of pain as a result of their experience. Frequently, people will stretch or move their bodies during sessions to work out physical and emotional tension that they may not have been aware of. By incorporating 5-MeO-DMT into the treatment program, we can help patients who have had the ibogaine experience to feel a certain NSE of release from the material that came up, as well as motivation and inspiration to move on with their life. Ibogaine can bring up a lot from the subconscious, and people are overwhelmed after the experience. In a recent overview article of the research on using psychedelics to treat addiction, the depth of one's mystical experience was the greatest predictor of long-term success. When we added the 5-MeO-DMT to our ibogaine protocol, we saw better outcomes in our patients versus ibogaine alone. TF, 5-MeO-DMT was not classified as a Schedule I substance in the US until 2011, and its use is legal in Mexico. Den, it's extraordinarily strong in its flavor and acts as a rocket ship back to God. It does take you back to source consciousness. Martin, addicts realize that they are divine beings, and when you have this realization that you're indestructible and infinite and divine, it's very hard to put a needle in your arm and continue using. TF, I have used 5-MeO-DMT but prefer edible, longer acting psychedelics. I don't worry much about 5-MeO addiction, but the rapid onset and short duration is closer in profile to substances I want to avoid, such as crack. I feel it's too user-friendly for my convenience-seeking personality. I like the fact that most edible whole plant options make one slightly nauseous, have a 4 to 8 hour or longer effect, and if you consume too much, you will almost certainly vomit. I view these characteristics as built-in safety mechanisms. Different strokes for different folks.